If you think abandoned places are empty, you're wrong. Sometimes they're just waiting for you to be alone. This happened only a couple of years ago. In my small town, there was a house everyone had forgotten about. It had been abandoned for roughly 20 years. An old building, almost completely swallowed by trees. No one wanted to buy it, and eventually people stopped talking about it altogether. The forest slowly claimed the house. Wood rotted, windows vanished behind branches. I was always drawn to places like that. Exploring abandoned locations had become something I enjoyed. One afternoon, when I had time off work, I decided to go there by myself. I brought a small backpack and a flashlight. Normally, I explored with friends, but this house was close and seemed less dangerous than other places we'd visited. The driveway was nearly gone, the gravel completely overtaken by grass. I pushed through the overgrowth and eventually turned my flashlight on as it grew darker. The house was farther into the woods than I remembered. It felt like I walked for 5 minutes before I finally reached it. The place was an old wooden home, built long before garages were common. It looked more like a large 2-story cabin. I approached a broken front window and leaned inside. For about half a minute, I just listened, making sure no one else was there. Hearing nothing but silence, I walked toward the front door. It wasn't locked and was already slightly open. I pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. Everything was decaying. What unsettled me most was that belongings were still scattered around, left behind by whoever lived there years ago. In the living room, a torn sofa sat under layers of dust. Picture frames had fallen from the walls, glass shattered across the floor. I slowly moved through the first floor, examining what had been left behind, trying to piece together who once lived there. The space was surprisingly small. After a short while, I went upstairs. The staircase creaked and shifted under my weight, and I couldn't believe it hadn't collapsed already. At the top was a hallway with 2 doors. One stood open, the other was shut. I looked into the open room. It was completely empty, which felt strange compared to the clutter downstairs. I stepped inside and swept my flashlight across the walls, when suddenly I heard a heavy thud from below. My heart started pounding instantly. It didn't sound like the house settling. I rushed back downstairs, shining my light everywhere. The silence felt heavier now, and I couldn't see anything that could have made the noise. My instincts told me to leave. My friends and I always agreed. If something felt off, we left immediately. Being alone, there was no question. I walked quickly toward the exit, flashlight moving constantly, but when I reached the front of the house, the door was closed. I knew I had left it open. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It wouldn't move. The door had been locked from the outside. Panic hit me all at once. Someone else was there with me. I ran to the broken window and jumped out. I didn't see anyone as I sprinted into the woods, switching off my flashlight and leaving the path. My heart was racing when I suddenly noticed a light ahead. I ducked behind a tree. Red and blue lights flickered through the branches. 2 police cars were driving down the overgrown driveway toward the house. They passed right by me and stopped near the entrance. I knew instantly they weren't there for me. After waiting, I slipped out of the woods and ran home. I never found out who was inside that house or what was happening there. No information was ever released. But if the police responded that fast, whatever was going on had to be serious. I was lucky to make it out alive. A few years earlier, I lived with 2 friends. Let's call them Mark and Dylan. We shared an apartment in the city while finishing our final year of school. We were all busy with work and classes, so free time was rare. But when we had it, we liked exploring, walking trails, driving to unfamiliar places, just wandering. One weekend night, we wanted to do something different. Dylan had heard from a friend about an abandoned factory outside the city. It sounded strange but interesting. None of us had done anything like that before, and we hesitated, but eventually decided to go. We took Mark's car and drove toward the outskirts. Living in the Midwest, the city abruptly turns into endless flat land. That's where the factory was. We found it using satellite maps. We parked near a gas station and walked the rest of the way. The street was completely empty. No cars, no people. The factory was far larger than we expected. Massive metal structures, rust everywhere, graffiti in places that didn't seem possible to reach. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire surrounded it, but sections had been cut open. We slipped through and approached a metal door that was already ajar. The moment we stepped inside, chills ran through me. The building groaned and swayed in the wind. All the lights were off, leaving only our weak flashlights. Huge, rusted machines filled the space, with narrow walkways between them. We stayed together at first, but I eventually drifted toward a hallway, glancing back to make sure one of them was still nearby. I went through a metal door into another room. As it closed behind me, I heard footsteps. I assumed it was my friends, but when I turned around, no one was there. I called their names, no response. Then I heard movement behind me. I turned and saw a man standing just a few feet away. Long hair, an unkempt beard, empty eyes. He charged at me without hesitation. I slammed the door shut and ran, yelling for my friends to leave. We escaped and never went back. Even earlier, back in high school, I explored with a friend. Let's call him Ethan. At the edge of town stood an abandoned church everyone avoided. It had been deserted for as long as I could remember. Trees nearly consumed it. We approached it one evening. The road was cracked and overgrown, and the building looked more unsettling than I remembered. Inside, everything was strangely untouched. Rows of benches. Silence. Echoing footsteps. Then we heard someone walking. We froze as a shadow crossed the room and exited the front door. We waited, barely breathing, then ran, without looking back. To this day, we don't know who was there, if it was even a person at all. A few years after all of that, I promised myself I was done with abandoned places. But sometimes situations find you, even when you're not looking for them. At the time, I was working late shifts and usually got home after midnight. One night, my car started making a strange noise, so I decided to take a shortcut through an old industrial area to get home faster. It wasn't abandoned exactly, just forgotten. Empty warehouses, broken streetlights, and long stretches of road with no houses nearby. Halfway through, my car stalled. I tried the ignition again and again, but the engine wouldn't turn over. My phone had almost no signal, and the only light came from a flickering street lamp about 30 yards away. I got out of the car, hoping maybe I could at least push it closer to the light. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. At the edge of the light, near one of the warehouses, I saw a figure standing still. Too still. I couldn't tell if it was a person or just a shadow at first. I called out, asking if they could help. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it took a step forward, just enough for me to see that it was facing me. I felt that familiar drop in my stomach. Something about the way it stood felt wrong, like it was watching me without actually moving its head. I backed toward my car, keeping my eyes on it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The figure suddenly started walking toward me. Not fast, not slow, just steady. I jumped back into my car and locked the doors. I didn't care if the engine was dead. I just wanted something between me and whatever was out there. Through the windshield, I watched as the figure stopped only a few feet from my hood. Under the streetlight, I realized it wasn't anyone I recognized. Its face looked pale and empty, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. It stood there for what felt like forever, not knocking, not speaking, just staring. Then, without warning, the streetlight went out. The darkness was instant, total. I couldn't see anything beyond my own reflection in the glass. I held my breath, waiting for a sound, footsteps, a knock, anything. Instead, my car suddenly started. I didn't think. I slammed the gas and sped away, tires screeching as I turned back onto the main road. I didn't look in the mirror until I was several blocks away. There was nothing behind me. I never took that shortcut again, and I never saw anything about an accident, a person, or even a report from that area. But sometimes, when I drive home late at night and my engine makes a strange noise, I still think about that figure, standing under the light, waiting for me to step closer. A while after that, I moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of town. It was cheap, quiet, and close to work. The landlord mentioned that the previous tenant had left suddenly, but I didn't think much of it. People move all the time. The house itself felt normal during the day. Nothing broken, nothing obviously wrong. But at night, it felt different. Not scary at first, just unsettling. Like the walls held on to sound a little too well, and the silence felt heavier than it should. The first thing I noticed was the footsteps. Almost every night, sometime after I turned the lights off, I would hear slow steps coming from the hallway. I assumed it was the house settling. Old buildings make noise. That's what I kept telling myself. But the footsteps always stopped right outside my bedroom door. I never heard the door open, never heard anyone leave. Just the sound of someone standing there for a moment. And then nothing. One night I worked up the courage to open the door as soon as the sound stopped. The hallway was empty. No movement, no shadows. Just darkness stretching toward the living room. That's when I started locking my bedroom door. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning. Slowly, carefully, like someone was trying not to make noise. I froze in bed, staring at the door, listening as the handle twisted back and forth. It didn't stop until I spoke. I don't even remember what I said. Something simple like, "Hello." The doorknob immediately went still. The next morning I checked the lock. It worked perfectly. Things escalated after that. Objects started moving. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen counter and find them on the floor by the front door. Cabinets I knew I'd closed were open when I came home. Once, I found the bathroom mirror wiped clean, except for a single handprint in the center. It wasn't small. I called the landlord and asked if anyone else had a key. He sounded confused and told me no. When I mentioned the previous tenant again, he went quiet for a few seconds before saying they had complained about sounds, too. That night, I didn't sleep. Sometime around 3 a.m., I heard the footsteps again, this time louder, slower. They moved from the living room, down the hallway, and stopped at my door like always. But this time, the door began to shake. Not violently, just enough to let me know something was leaning against it. I could hear breathing on the other side, deep, uneven. I stayed completely still, barely breathing myself. Minutes passed. Then the pressure against the door eased, and the footsteps retreated back down the hallway. I moved out the next day. While packing, I found something tucked behind a panel in the bedroom closet. A small notebook covered in dust. Inside were pages filled with frantic writing. The last entry stood out. It said, "It watches from the hall. It learns how long you stay quiet. Don't let it think you're asleep." I left the notebook there. Even now, years later, I still sleep with my bedroom door locked. And sometimes, when everything is silent, I catch myself listening, just to make sure no one is standing outside, waiting for me to fall asleep.